I make a shit ton of money every single month building apps with Lovable. I'm talking that my agency, Creme Digital, does $250,000 every single month without fail, building apps with AI for clients all over the world, ranging from startups, enterprises, you name it, we built it, okay? But this video isn't about me flexing. I want to show you the exact steps, the roadmap I took to get here. Because I was once a kid in high school. I was once somebody that sat in the back of their class, working on their computer, trying to make something of themselves. While the world was telling me to go to university, go take the safe route, I knew that I wanted to do more. And so this is a story of how I went from being a broke high schooler, a skinny kid, somebody that didn't have a lot of confidence, somebody that had no idea what he wanted to do with his life. And now I'm a 22-year-old, I make millions of dollars. I have, my dream apartment here, in an office, in a home studio. I sit here, and my life consists of building apps with AI, using Lovable. I get to travel the world, and I get to make really cool products, really cool startups, and meet really interesting people. So let me take you back to where it all started. In the back of my high school classroom. You see, from a very early age, I knew that I didn't want to go to university. I just knew that there was more to life than building for somebody else, for sitting in a cubicle, for a life that revolved around working a set amount of hours. I knew that I wanted to see the upside that came with entrepreneurship, and I knew that university wasn't the way to do that. Now, for some of you watching, that may not be the case. For some of you that may be questioning if this is the path for you, maybe university and college is the right route. But for me, I knew that I wanted something more, and university wasn't the way to do it. And so I started really young. When I was 13, I started building different apps using no-code tools like Bubble. And Bubble for me was a super pivotal moment. For those of you who aren't familiar, Bubble's a no-code tool that really is pretty outdated now, but at the time was a super cool tool that I was able to leverage in order to build apps being untechnical. And so I remember in high school building multiple different apps. I built a Airbnb for workspaces. So essentially being able to connect people that had workspaces or desks or like conference rooms available with startups or people looking to rent them out by the hour. I built a Facebook marketplace for my school and for the surrounding schools so kids could trade or buy things off people in school to create more of a safe ecosystem. And there's so many other things I can name that I built, and it really inspired this love for building. So much so to the fact where when COVID came around, I had people starting to ask me to help them build products. And one of those companies was a Taekwondo studio in Toronto. And when COVID happened, people were freaking out. They did not know what to do. And so I came in here and being the naive kid I was at the time, I thought, well, I've been able to build apps in the past using this tool called Bubble. So maybe I can actually help other people do the same. And so it was January or February 2020 when we took on our first client. Me and my co-founder, who I met just through the grapevine of events and all that stuff, we were able to sign our first big deal of around $50,000 at the time. But before even we got there, we were doing small hustles. We were trying to just get a name for ourselves, whether it was shooting real estate videos, whether it was, doing social media marketing and Facebook ads and all these various hustles. But the thing that I learned really early, and this is probably a really big lesson for all you guys that are building right now, is that the people that do the best are the people that are as niche specific as possible. Okay. So you see, we went from doing all these various business models, right? We tried, social media, photography, drop shipping, e-commerce, all these different things, and we would offer it all to our clients. But ultimately, I realized that building products using these tools was our competitive advantage. It was the thing that we could focus on and become really good at. And so that's what we did. After we found that first client, we realized that this is a path that really, we could scale. And we also just enjoyed doing it. I mean, it was a lot more fun than having to go to different real estate shoots or going to do various social media campaigns. I actually enjoyed building products. And so after the first one, I was like, well, what if we just kind of pivot the entire company to only building products with no-code tools? And so that's exactly what we did. In 2021, we rebranded our company, called it Creme Digital instead of Creme Media. And we went all in on building products for startups and for enterprises. And I believe the second we made that switch, things really took a turn. Because what ends up happening is you start focusing your efforts and you start defining what you're good at. And that makes it a lot easier to go after customers. And so I remember one of the first things we did was just sign up for the partner programs that were specific for building software. So we signed up for all the tools that had their own partner programs that would essentially refer clients or refer people that needed some expert, advice and agency help. And so those programs basically got us to our first, $100,000. I would say, I think it probably brought us to around $600,000-$700,000 just in a year, just from those kind of programs. We ended up hiring a sales guy, which really helped us, focus on the actual fulfillment side of things, while we had somebody to kind of actually, close the deals, because that was a really time-consuming part of the process, especially back then when you're just starting out. You really have to prove yourself. So, fast forwarding a bit, we built this agency, and one of the things that, another big learning for all you guys building right now, is that building an agency in particular means that you need to have your own unique angle on the market, right? And so for ours, we wanted to focus on building apps. We wanted to focus on building apps with no code, and we wanted to focus on building apps with no code for startups. But there was one caveat to this, which is that no code was looked at as a very old, outdated, kind of ugly and clunky way of building software. And to some extent, that was true. You had a lot of builders using these tools and were building really crummy products. But ultimately, what we realized is all these agencies, all these builders, they were all just developers. None of them had any design or product experience. And so that's when we were like, well, what if we actually focus on that? What if we were able to charge more because we're able to deliver a higher quality product, but add in a more, world-class design team, a more polished end product to make the price, more valuable. And so that's exactly what we did. That paid even more dividends. The more we focused in on a niche, the more the agency grew, because we were able to have a unique value prop in the market. It was no longer competing against a bunch of different competitors. It was much easier to define where we stood in the market compared to our competitors. And probably, months after that, we had our first $100,000 month, which at the time, you have to remember, and maybe I didn't make this clear, I was in high school this entire time. And so this was probably around grade 12. And I remember, still having to go to class, but seeing $50,000, $100,000 in Stripe, in my dashboard as I was sitting in business class, being lectured around how to run a business by a teacher that's never done it before. And so that's when I really realized, I was like, what am I doing here? It really reaffirmed this idea that university was not going to be the path, because I was just going to get more of what I'm already seeing right now. So ultimately, the business continued to do well, and I convinced my parents and myself, frankly, that it was the right decision not to go to university. And it definitely took some convincing, okay? And one of the biggest things that I had going for me was that the business was working. The business was able to show meaningful results based on my efforts. And so I think that was a promising signal for me. It was a promising signal for my parents, and honestly a promising signal for the team, the small team that we had at the time, to continue to build. And so we ended up kind of locking in, and I decided not to go, and I spent the rest of that first summer focused on the business. It was the first time where I was fully dedicated to building something for basically my entire life. It was a really weird feeling, because for all of you that go from maybe building a side hustle, and then the side hustle becomes the main hustle, it goes from it just being what you do on the weekends to basically your entire life. It almost feels like a simulation. I'm not sure how relatable that is for a lot of you, but for those of you who've been in that situation, you kind of know. So we end up building this agency. It's doing well, but we have one problem, which is that the no-code space, the space that we were playing in, it just wasn't big enough. Even though we were one of the top agencies in the space, we just were not able to break through, past that $1 million mark. We were able to hit the $1 million mark, but we weren't really able to hit that $2 million mark, or even anywhere close. And so I was starting to really doubt the business. This is probably, we're like 4 years into the business at this point. This basically is from, probably 2021, 2022 to 2024. So basically like 3-ish years. And this was the end of last year. And I think the team, myself included, was kind of tired. I mean, obviously we had grown the team a significant amount. We had built a really good process. We have really good clients. We had enterprise clients even. But the reality was that for whatever reason, we just could not break through. A lot of that is probably learnings that, I can share deeper in another video, but a lot of that just had to do with the market not being one that was growing fast and one that was really able to, bring on the scale that we were looking for. Because ultimately, you're only as good as the boat that you're riding. You're only as good as, the horse that you pick. So, you should make sure that the market you're going into is one that's actually growing, because even if you do nothing, even if all you do is just provide a great experience and a great service and a great product, you will grow, okay? That's the bare minimum. And so it wasn't until January 2025, right? Things were looking pretty bleak, honestly. The agency was starting to slow down. For whatever reason, I think people were just starting to see that these AI tools were coming along, and people were starting to not want to use no-code tools very much anymore. On top of that, I think the team was just kind of burnt out from stagnation. It wasn't until I stumbled across this tool, which obviously is Lovable, but at the time, it was not the Lovable you know now. Even though this wasn't very long ago, Lovable was a shell of the company it was today, or it is today. Probably at the time doing under $10 million a year. The design looked nothing like it does today. The product worked nothing like it does today. It was basically an AI prompter with a super base connection. That was basically it. And I was playing with this tool, and I was very impressed because there was a lot of different AI tools in the market that I had tried, but they were all very gimmicky. And this was the first time where I actually tried a tool, and it was actually, coming up with an output that was reasonable. And I remember that first night, I started building a client project that we had that usually would take us, months to build. But I decided let's give this a shot. Let's see what Lovable is capable of. And I would start building it. And at moments where I was like, okay, well, this is where it's going to get stuck. It would fix itself. Or I was like, okay, well, it's probably not going to be able to do this, and it did it. Or it's probably not going to be able to connect the back end, and it did it. And I just kept running into these obstacles that kept becoming overcome. Now, mind you, I didn't complete the entire app. If I kept going, I probably would have ran into more milestones. But for everybody that knows, vibe coding is kind of bittersweet, right? You can take the product to about 80% of the way there, and you're riding this high. But usually near the end of the last 20% is where things can kind of get a little more tricky. Obviously, very overcomable, but takes a little bit more, debugging and maybe bring things in the cursor, etc. But at the time, I was just so impressed. And so I was like, well, now I get it. I get where this is going to go. Now, maybe this is a bit early. Maybe, I shouldn't have been building client projects with it. But I knew that this is going to be the future. And I want to get ahead of the curve rather than be behind, even if we're a month or two early. Because, as you now know, this space is moving incredibly fast. So I decided the next day to call an emergency meeting with the team. And we decided to pivot the entire company. Okay, we never built another Bubble app again from that point. And I gotta say, this was a very monumental moment. This was a moment that I think my team questioned, I questioned, and we had a lot of headaches. It was not, smooth sailing. Lovable was just not really at the point at the time to be building these client grade products. But luckily, we had a development team that was already super sophisticated and was able to, leverage their technical skills to move it to Cursor or move it to other tools when we needed to, while still keeping Lovable as our base. Now, Lovable at the time, as I said, was not the company it is today. When they saw people like us actually trying to build an agency on top of Lovable, they reached out and they were like, how can we help you? And so that's when we kind of started building this agency partnership page that we'll throw up here, lovable.dev/partners. And basically, that is where we kind of got our start. That is when the Lovable ecosystem finally started. And it was like probably a month after we started building, we kind of had that initial partnership with Lovable. And we slowly worked with them on improving the product for themselves, but also for our customers. And we made it apparent to what are the things that we need in order to be able to serve clients. And they were incredibly responsive and incredibly eager to help that process. And within about, a month or two after that, Lovable was in, a very different place. At this point, we're probably coming into March, April, right? And Lovable is starting to really evolve, okay? Lovable is starting to become a much more fleshed out product, more, it's growing super fast. And now all of a sudden, we are this agency that, started when there was probably 2 or 3 agencies, and now we're like the top agency in a space that is starting to get really competitive and really crowded. But because we moved early and because we built that relationship early, we had that first mover's advantage. Things were going well. I posted about this process on Twitter and went viral multiple times, and that only expedited the growth of both myself, the agency, Lovable, etc. I think when people realized that you can make serious money on Lovable, the perspective of Lovable changed. It changed from this like gimmicky tool that people were building apps with for fun and maybe launching them to like, no, startups, real startups that are getting venture funded are using Lovable to build their MVP products, and they're actually looking good and they're usable and they're scalable and all these things. It was a complete shift that ended up happening over those 2 months, thanks to Lovable improving their product, thanks to agencies like ourselves that were building, and thanks to content creators that were making people aware of this impact. Things were going great. Obviously, we are running into our obstacles here and there, but things really took a turn in about, I would have to say, June. Okay, June was the first time I had met Anton in New York. Anton is the CEO of Lovable, and we wanted to kind of start talking about what it meant to like deepen our partnership. And what we came up with was a few things. The first thing is that we wanted to give gold agencies, us being the first one, even more support. So how can Lovable and agencies have an even more direct relationship in working with clients, especially when it came to enterprise clients? So that was the first thing. The other thing was on the content strategy side of things. He really wanted us as agency owners and as builders ourselves to be involved in creating content. So we partnered on different webinars and content, things that enabled other users to see how to build on Lovable. And ultimately, this resulted in a trip to Sweden. This trip will be forever ingrained in my brain because not only was it just a legendary trip, for those of you who have not gone to Sweden, I highly recommend it. It is quite the place. But the best way I can describe it is going to Facebook offices in 2004, whenever they launched. Like the early days of Facebook. That's the best way I can describe the energy. Imagine having a country, Sweden, right, that has this company, Lovable, and the entire country is riding for this startup. Lovable is like the thing in Sweden, and we went to go hang with Lovable and their team. And so not only was the experience of being in the office with Lovable, but even just exploring the city through the lens of Lovable was such an interesting and different experience. People would come up to us and be like, are you with the Lovable team, etc. We even hosted a 150-person rooftop event where we brought in some builders from all over Stockholm, Sweden, and we hosted our own panel with Anton and the Lovable team, and it was really successful and a really amazing thing that we got to be a part of. So many just amazing experiences, but ultimately it came with one big moment, which is that we finally solidified this big gold partnership. This partnership that would solidify us as the #1 Lovable agency, as the first and only gold agency at the time, and just a really big milestone for us and Lovable as we continue this next chapter. There's a lot more I can get into. If you guys have questions or you want me to do a part 2, I would love to do that. But that is the story, really, of how I went from a 17-year-old that was broke, insecure, skinny, to somebody that step by step, different. This is over 6 years now. Okay, I'm the product of 6 years of hard work, and I want that to be abundantly clear. This is not something that you can just snap your fingers at. Okay, but with the right people in place, with the right steps, with the right execution, with the right hard work, this can easily happen to people that follow these same steps. But with the same hard work, with the same discipline, with the same persistence, this is possible for anybody. And I hope this story is one that can inspire you to go and build your own products or agencies or businesses, whether they're reliant on Lovable or not. But I will say that this space is only getting hotter. Lovable is now the fastest growing company in the world, I believe at $120 million ARR in 8 months, which is just incredible. So I'm going to be posting and documenting this journey more. I'm testing out different content styles. I'm trying this one out. This has been raw. I didn't script a single thing, but I hope you enjoyed it. So feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.